When the 19th century began, an American woman was not permitted to vote or hold office. By law, she had few rights to own her own property or her own earnings. She could not take custody of her children in the event of divorce. There were few colleges or professions open to her. Schooling. Tax-supported schooling for girls began as early as 1767 in New England. It was optional and some towns proved reluctant. Northampton, Massachusetts, for example, was a late adopter because they had many rich families who dominated the political and social structures, and they did not want to pay taxes to aid poor families. Not until 1800s did Northampton educate girls with public money. In contrast, the town of Sutton, Massachusetts was diverse in terms of social leadership and religion at an early point in history. Sutton paid for its schools by means of taxes on households with children only, thereby creating an active constituency in favor of universal education for both boys and girls. Historians point out that reading and writing were different skills in the colonial era. School taught both, but in places without schools, reading was mainly taught to boys and also few privileged girls. Women had responsibilities to stay at home and clean their houses and take care of their children when their husbands were not home in the army. Women should have the right to be in the army and have part in politics. Women did not point to language in the nation's founding documents that supported their views. For example, the Constitution treats men and women equally, using the word person, not man, in its description of the qualifications for the nation's highest political offices. During the Revolutionary War, Abigail Adams had urged her husband to remember the ladies, to give women a voice in the new government. John Adams returned a laughing letter by answer, and did not bring Abigail's idea up in congressional debate. However, many women, and even some men, agreed with Abigail. They argued that women were educated and literate, as capable of forming opinions as their husbands. Since they had to obey the laws of the land, it was only right that they should be able to vote. Otherwise, they were in the same position as the colonists before the Revolution. They were unrepresented in their own government. In a way, they were slaves. During the 1830s, Sarah and Angelina Grimmick, Quakers from South Carolina, began speaking and writing against slavery for women's rights. In 1839, Angelina Grimmick and her husband Theodore Weld published American Slavery as It Is, a document that was to convert many readers to the cause of abolition. When male ministers sneered publicly at the Grimmicks for daring to speak to mixed audiences of men and women, claiming that such work was appropriate for only men, Grimmicks retorted that men and women were created equal. Therefore, it was moral and right for a man to preach against slavery, and it was equally moral and right for a woman to do so. The Grimmicks also pointed out that since the U.S. government claimed to disserve its power from the content of governed, women had just as much right as men to vote. In 1840, American reformers Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott attended a World's Anti-Slavery Convention in London. They were outraged to learn that women were not welcome. The convention leaders finally agreed to allow them into the hall, but only if they would sit behind a curtain that screened them from male participants in the convention. The two women vowed to fight such prejudices. In 1848, they organized the Seneca Falls Convention, the first national meeting held in the United States. More than 300 people came to the small town of Seneca Falls, New York, to hear the speeches. The convention resulted in the Declaration of Sentiments, which called for legal and social reform. Its language deliberately quoted the Declaration of Independence, with the ironic twist of showing how the men who wrote and approved that document had ignored half the population of the United States. All women of all ages and races ignored.